In Lusaka, Zambia, Nandi lived quietly in her mother's house, carrying a secret no one cared to notice. Every month, she was the one paying the electricity, the water, the school fees for her siblings, even the car insurance. She never told anyone, never asked for thanks. She just worked, sacrificed, and let everyone believe they were managing on their own. But one evening, her mother lost her temper and shouted at her to pack her bags and leave. The words cut deep, but Nandi didn't cry, she didn't fight back. She calmly picked up her small suitcase and walked out of the house that she had been holding together in silence. Her younger sister mocked her as she left, calling her useless baggage, but Nandi only gave a cold, quiet look. They thought she was walking away powerless, yet in truth she carried with her the lifeline of the home. That night in her small rented room in Kitwe, she opened her banking app and, with one steady breath, cancelled every single autopay. Electricity, water, Wi-Fi, tuition, car insurance. She whispered to herself, let them see who was really carrying the house. Within 3 days, the Wi-Fi was gone. A week later, the lights went out. School called about unpaid fees, the car company threatened to repossess. The once proud home fell into chaos. 2 weeks later, desperate, they begged her back. This time Nandi brought proof, stacks of receipts and statements showing every sacrifice she had made. The silence in the room was heavier than her mother's anger. Nandi stood tall and said, "You told me to pack my bags. I did. But I also packed your comfort with me." Then she left for good, free at last. For many years, Nandi had been the quiet strength of her family, though no one ever realized it. Every single bill that kept the house running smoothly went through her hands. She was the one who paid the school fees so her younger siblings could sit in classrooms without being sent home. She was the one who kept the lights shining in the house by paying the electricity. She made sure the water kept running, the internet stayed connected, and the car payments were made on time. When someone in the family fell sick, it was Nandi who quietly covered the hospital bills. She did all of this from her small salary, sacrificing her own needs so that her family could live in comfort. Yet, no one ever noticed. Her mother assumed it was her own hard work that kept everything together. Her siblings thought things just somehow worked out on their own. Nobody ever stopped to ask Nandi how she managed her own life, or if she had enough left for herself after carrying so much. She never complained, she never bragged, she never reminded anyone of what she was doing. She simply set everything on autopay, making sure no one in the family ever felt the sting of unpaid bills or the shame of being cut off. Her clothes were old, her phone was outdated, and sometimes she skipped meals so that there would be enough money to keep the family comfortable. She swallowed her pride every time her mother scolded her or when her siblings laughed at her simple lifestyle. They never once thanked her. They never once suspected that the very roof over their heads was standing because of her sacrifices. To them, she was just another daughter, another sister. To them, she was almost invisible. But deep inside, Nandi carried a quiet power. She knew exactly how much her family depended on her, even if they never said it. She knew that without her, everything would collapse like a house built on sand. And even though she was treated as if she contributed nothing, she kept giving and giving, because that was her nature. Still, as the years passed, the weight grew heavier. She began to wonder if her silence was protecting her family, or simply allowing them to take her for granted. The truth was hidden in plain sight, she had been the silent backbone of the entire family, and without her, their world would fall apart. And one day, whether they admitted it or not, they were going to find out just how much Nandi had been holding them together. When her mother's voice thundered through the house with the sharp words, "Get out," Nandi felt the sting in her chest. For a moment she stood still, staring at the walls she had worked so hard to keep standing, the roof she had silently paid for with her sweat. Her heart wanted to cry, but her face remained calm. She didn't argue, she didn't beg, she didn't try to defend herself. She quietly pulled her small suitcase from under the bed, the same bag she used whenever she traveled for work, and began folding her few clothes. Her younger sister leaned against the doorway, arms crossed and a smirk on her face. With a mocking laugh, she said, "Finally, the useless baggage is leaving." The words were meant to break Nandi, to crush her spirit, but they did not. Nandi didn't reply, didn't throw an insult back. Instead, she zipped up her little suitcase, lifted it with one hand, and walked to the door. Her silence was louder than any argument she could have given. As she stepped outside, she paused for just a second. She looked at her mother, who was still burning with anger, and at her siblings, who seemed amused by the scene. None of them had the slightest idea that the very life they were living depended on her. To them, she looked like she was leaving empty-handed, powerless, defeated. But Nandi knew the truth. She was not just walking out with a suitcase of clothes. She was walking out with the invisible system that had kept the whole house alive: the bills, the school fees, the car payments, the internet, the electricity. Her silence carried a message they could not read yet. It said, "You think I am nothing. You think I add no value. But you are about to discover that without me, everything you take for granted will fall apart." She walked down the path slowly, her step steady, her face calm. No tears, no pleading, no looking back. To the neighbors, it looked like a girl being chased from her mother's house. To her family, it looked like victory, as though they had finally gotten rid of a burden. But Nandi's quiet eyes told a different story. She wasn't leaving powerless. She was leaving with control, with the strength to pull the strings from afar. The real goodbye wasn't cold for her, it was powerful. She knew the storm that was coming, and she walked away knowing they would soon feel it. That night, in her small rented room in Kitwe, Nandi sat on the edge of her bed with her suitcase still unopened. The room was quiet, almost too quiet, but for the first time in years, the silence felt like freedom. She pulled out her phone and opened her banking app. Her hands didn't shake, her heart didn't race, she was calm, almost peaceful. For so long she had carried her family without thanks, without even the smallest word of appreciation. Tonight, she was finally going to put that burden down. One by one, she went through the list. First, she opened the electricity account and with a single tap, cancelled the autopay. Then the water bill. Then the car insurance. Her finger moved steadily, like she had been waiting for this moment all along. She scrolled down to the school tuition account and cancelled that too. Finally, she turned to the internet bill, the one that kept her siblings glued to their screens every night. With a small smile, she tapped cancel. When it was done, she set the phone on her lap and closed her eyes for a moment. She felt no guilt, no sadness. Instead, she felt a quiet strength rising in her chest. She whispered softly, almost like a prayer, "Let them see who was really carrying the house." To her family, she had always been invisible, the quiet one who didn't matter. They had no idea that every comfort they enjoyed had been tied to her. But in that moment, with just a few clicks, she had pulled back the curtain. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't hate. It was truth. And soon, the truth would speak louder than all their mocking words. Nandi lay back on her bed, the glow of her phone screen fading in the dark. For the first time in years, she felt light, as though the weight she had carried on her shoulders had finally been lifted. Somewhere in Lusaka, the lights were still on, the water was still flowing, the Wi-Fi still buzzing, but she knew it was only a matter of days. Soon the house that had called her useless baggage would learn that she had been the backbone all along. And this time, she wasn't going to step in to save them. She had flicked the button, and now she would watch from afar as they discovered the truth she had carried in silence for so long. Within 3 days, the first crack appeared. The Wi-Fi went down, and the house was thrown into confusion. Her younger siblings shouted at each other, blaming the router, blaming the service provider, even blaming the neighbors for having better internet. None of them imagined that the reason was much closer. They thought it was just a small problem that would be fixed in a day. But it wasn't. By the end of the week, the lights went out. The house that had always been bright and comfortable suddenly sank into darkness. Candles were lit, and her mother sat fuming in the corner, demanding to know why the bills hadn't been paid. Her children stared at each other, confused. One said it was the power company's mistake, another swore the bill had been handled. But the truth was that nobody in that house had ever touched the bills. They had lived their lives thinking it all happened by magic. Then the school called. Her younger brother was told not to come back until fees were cleared. Her mother shouted into the phone, making promises she couldn't keep. Soon after, the car company sent a warning that the family car would be repossessed. It was the same car her mother proudly drove every day, never realizing the quiet girl she had pushed away had been keeping it on the road. Groceries too stopped arriving. The fridge grew emptier, and the proud house that once hosted guests with confidence now struggled to put meals on the table. Her mother's rage grew louder each day. She stormed through the house, demanding answers from her children. Who was supposed to handle this? Who forgot? She barked. The siblings turned on each other, throwing blame around like stones. The younger sister who had mocked Nandi accused her brother. The brother accused the eldest. They shouted, fought, and pointed fingers, while the real reason sat silently in the background. None of them saw it. None of them realized that the world they had lived in. The lights, the food, the car, the internet, the education, had always been standing on the shoulders of the very girl they had called useless. She had left quietly, but the silence she left behind was speaking now, louder than words. For the first time, they were forced to live without her hidden hand, and the empire they thought was theirs began to crumble piece by piece. And still, none of them knew the storm had only just begun. The proud family that once carried themselves with so much confidence slowly crumbled into chaos. The neighbors who once admired them now whispered in low voices, shaking their heads when they saw the house in darkness night after night. The hum of the generator was gone, the glow from the windows no longer lit the street. People who once came over for tea now passed by with pity in their eyes. The family that had always shown off their comfort was now living like strangers to the very life they used to brag about. The younger sister who once mocked Nandi found herself in a bitter place. Her classmates laughed when she asked for a lift to school. She had always been the one boasting about the family car, posting pictures online, showing off a lifestyle that wasn't hers to begin with. Now, with the car threatened and no fuel money, she stood at the side of the road begging for rides. The same mouth that had called her sister useless baggage was now quiet with shame, but still too proud to admit the truth. The mother, once so commanding, began to borrow money in desperation. She knocked on doors and called distant relatives, giving excuses, saying the bank had made mistakes or the company was overcharging them. She even lied to her friends, pretending the bills were delayed because of a technical issue. But lies are thin walls, and the cracks kept spreading. The electricity never came back on, the school fees remained unpaid, and the car company's threats grew louder each day. Inside the house, pride fell apart. Nights were spent in the dark, with children arguing, candles burning low, and everyone snapping at one another. The siblings who once laughed at Nandi now turned against each other, blaming one another for the disaster. The family dinners that used to be full of chatter were now cold and silent. Every small problem felt like a mountain. Even meals became harder to prepare as the fridge emptied and food spoiled without power. The mother sat quietly some nights, staring into the darkness, replaying her own words in her head, "Get out." Those words had started the unraveling. But even then, she couldn't bring herself to say out loud that maybe she had been wrong. Instead, she wrapped herself in anger, refusing to admit that the one they had dismissed, the one they had called useless, had been the spine of the entire home. The once proud household was gone. In its place was a broken family, living in shadows, eaten alive by shame, unable to admit that their pride had blinded them to the truth. And the truth was this: the girl they had thrown away had been the one holding everything together. 2 weeks passed before Nandi heard from her family again. It wasn't a call of love or apology, it was a call of desperation. The house was falling apart, and no one could stop it. Her mother, once too proud to bend, finally sent for her. When Nandi arrived, the living room felt different. The laughter was gone, the pride had vanished, and in its place was a heavy silence. The house that once stood tall in the neighborhood now looked tired, as if even the walls were weighed down by shame. Her mother sat stiffly, her face hard, but her eyes restless. She looked at Nandi and asked in a low, sharp voice, "Did you have anything to do with this? Did you cause all this mess?" The siblings, who had once laughed at her, now stared at her nervously, waiting for her answer. They expected her to yell, to fight, to deny. But Nandi did none of that. Instead, she quietly placed a thick folder on the table. She opened it slowly, letting the silence stretch. Inside were years of bank statements, receipts, and proof of every bill she had paid, the electricity, the water, the school fees, the car, the groceries, the internet. Page after page, she laid them out. Her siblings leaned forward, their mouths open, their faces pale. Each receipt was like a mirror, showing them how blind they had been all along. They had mocked her, dismissed her, treated her like nothing, while she had been the reason their lives had been so easy. Her mother's hands trembled as she flipped through the papers. She stopped when she saw the cancelled Autopay notices, the exact moment when everything in the house had fallen apart. The truth hit harder than any insult. It wasn't the bank. It wasn't the power company. It wasn't bad luck. It was Nandi, the girl they had cast aside, who had carried them all these years and then simply stepped away. The room was so quiet it felt like even the walls were listening. No one dared to speak. Nandi didn't raise her voice, didn't insult them, didn't even look angry. She just let the papers speak for her. Her silence was heavier than shouting could ever be. For the first time, they saw her not as the weak daughter or the useless sister, but as the backbone they had broken with their pride. That day, Nandi didn't beg to be accepted, and she didn't stay to be needed. She had only come back to show them the truth. And as they sat in stunned silence, she knew they would never forget the sight of those papers, the proof of every sacrifice they had ignored. As the last paper slid across the table, the room froze. Not a single sound could be heard. The ticking clock on the wall suddenly felt louder than the breathing of the people inside. Her mother, who had always spoken with such authority, now sat stiff, her face burning red with shame. She couldn't look Nandi in the eye. Her siblings, who had once mocked her, stared at the receipts like they were staring at ghosts. Every line, every figure, was proof that the girl they had called useless had been the one keeping them alive all along. The silence was heavy, pressing on everyone's chest. No one could find words. The truth was too raw, too sharp. Nandi didn't need to shout, she didn't need to cry, she didn't even need to explain. The papers had done all the talking. The family who once saw her as invisible now saw her as the backbone of everything they had lost. Nandi stood tall, her eyes steady, her voice calm but strong. "You told me to pack my bags," she said slowly. "I did. But I also packed your comfort with me." The words cut deeper than any argument could. They carried no anger, only truth. Without waiting for a reply, she turned and walked toward the door. This time, there was no mocking laugh, no shouting behind her, no one calling her useless. Only silence. But it wasn't the silence of dismissal, it was the silence of regret, of shame, of realization. As the door closed behind her, she left more than a house. She left a lesson carved so deeply it would never be forgotten: never mistake quiet sacrifice for weakness, because one day, silence can shake an entire world.